I love my tribe. I have so much pride being Seminole because of the history of the Seminole tribe of Florida and being the unconquered Seminole tribe of Florida, meaning we're the ones who did not sign a treaty with the US government. And I feel like that makes us so resilient in a sense. And that's not to say that other tribes aren't resilient. It's just that I think if you talk to any Native person, they have a specific pride about their tribe, right? Okay, so that's why I love my tribe, and we have so many stories that comes along with the narrative of being resilient. And yeah, so the main one is being unconquered, and that makes me proud.
That's nice.
The community is usually very supportive. It's a matriarch society, so it's women empowerment in a sense, like generationally. So I feel like it's very supportive. I love our government structure as well. I think it works well for being a sovereign nation. And I just love seeing the different generations learning from their grandparents. You know, you always see the younger ones with their grandparents and just trying to learn the ways in our tradition. And I feel like that makes us strong, is being tied to our culture and still being on the land that we were originally from. So the governmental structure is pretty much, it makes up the council. We have a board of representatives. Each reservation has their representative to be that voice for that reservation. And to because we're so spread out sometimes, so when we have like our council meetings and everything, the council, you know, they hear the people out, because the people's voice is very important in decision making as well. So I wouldn't really call it like a democracy in the natural way of what we know what democracy is, but a true democracy, because the people's voice is really what makes the decisions within our tribe. No, I feel like when I was younger, I probably dealt with like certain identity issues, and that's natural when you are mixed heritage or mixed race. So my community is supportive, especially like when you're enrolled. It's full of acceptance, if that makes sense. So I think it was more of an identity struggle on my end. But as I grew up and I realized that I didn't really have to choose between, you know, being Black or being Native, because I grew up in a traditional Seminole household. So I have, you know, my culture, and that's what I was raised around. So I feel like growing up, I have a good balance of both. And that did take time. It's not to say like, oh, I was born, you know, very strong in my identity. So it took time, and it's just having that full understanding that you don't have to choose whether you're Black or Native, because you're both. And being tied to both cultures is what makes you strong as an individual within your identity. Okay, so I think it's important to gain an understanding of what a Black Seminole is, and how people who are Black and Native choose to identify, because sometimes you may come across someone who's Seminole who says, yes, I am a Black Seminole, or, you know, Black Seminole is actually part of the Freedmen Band, you know, so, but we're the Seminole tribe of Florida, so our history is a little different if you're speaking of the Black Seminole. So it's more of an individual identity of what it is that you want to be called. Myself, I identify as being Black and Seminole because I know the history of the Freedmen Band, and, you know, having slave camps and everything, and intermingling in that way. So I guess my experience being Black and Seminole, I feel like that makes me stronger as an individual, because I have two types of perspective, right? And so I think that makes me different, like living amongst the people or on the reservation of being Seminole and Black, is that your perspective or your scope of the world is a little bit different. I feel like coming from two types of, I wouldn't say oppressed people, but those who had the struggle with being in the US, whether it be by slavery or being the originals who, you know, suffered generational trauma. So just being from both of those things, I feel that that ties us closer than we think. And I feel like if we communicate more about what it is that we went through, we can find out how similar we are, and the resiliency that both cultures have, in a sense. So I just think it comes a lot from communication and finding those similarities. And also, I know, like, viewing a lot of the African culture, like from the original land, some of our sewing style is very similar. So I think that that's pretty cool as well. I think how we got to this point, right? So it's just the intergenerational trauma is something that I'm working on educating people more, and seeing how these affect us to this day. And a lot of people don't know that it still affects them, whether it be residential schools or boarding schools. You know, that creates emotional trauma, and you don't really know how to cope with your emotions, and so you can't show your child affection in the way that they need to be shown. And, you know, it's a trickle effect. So I believe intergenerational trauma is something that should be highlighted and learned more about. And also not just the trauma aspect, but the healing aspect of it too. Where do we go from here? What are the necessary steps to kind of be a cycle breaker, in a sense, to break these stigmas and the things that come along with it. And of course, it's more of a not coping, but really working through the process and the emotions, and bringing awareness to your emotional state. Because it's one thing for someone to point out and say, okay, yes, as Native people, we deal with intergenerational trauma from the removal or from the Trail of Tears, and how that attaches us to our home. And sometimes we may feel homeless within America, but all of it's, you know, Native. But it's those things that lead to a trickle effect in how you raise your kids in your community and everything. So I feel that should be definitely highlighted along with healing. Such a strong, silent people. So you may not even get conversation out of us. Mm-hmm. But it means a lot to us if you are willing to get to know us, right, personally, or ask questions, even though we may not answer. That is kind of like slowly chipping at a wall, right? So it shows that you care, and the more that we see that you have the interest in actually knowing, or want to know more about the people that you are serving, then that kind of puts us at ease. Like, okay, they're trying, they're not just here for a month and then they find a job somewhere else. So trust is a really big thing to us, because, you know, history shows that we were very trustworthy, you know, trusting people, and that didn't work in our favor sometimes. So it's a part of that intergenerational trauma, as I spoke about before. And so we still hold that very close to us. So you have to gain our trust in order to gain insight, because we're private people. So it's important not to be offended if we don't want to speak, you know? So I think that's important, is to understand trust is very important.